What would you do if the man you promised forever to, the one who held your hand through every storm for 25 years, looked you in the eyes and told you he wanted someone younger? Not just any younger woman, but someone who could give him what you no longer could. Someone who hadn't spent decades building a life with him, raising his children, sacrificing her dreams so his could soar. What would you do when the person who promised to grow old with you decided that growing old with you was no longer appealing? For Margaret Shen, that nightmare became her reality on a Tuesday evening in late September. And what her husband David never expected was that by asking for someone younger, he would force Margaret to become someone stronger. This is the story of a woman who spent 25 years being everything to everyone, only to discover that the most important person she needed to be was herself. Stay with me, because Margaret's journey from devastation to liberation will remind you that it's never too late to choose yourself. The house on Maple Street had always been Margaret's pride. A colonial-style home with blue shutters and a wraparound porch where she'd spent countless mornings with her coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. She'd planted the rose bushes herself, 15 years ago, when their daughter Emma started high school. The garden had been her therapy, her escape, the one place where she could dig her hands into something and see immediate, tangible results. Tonight, those roses looked different in the fading light. They seemed older somehow, their petals starting to wilt at the edges despite her careful tending. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, her hands submerged in soapy dishwater, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Behind her, she could hear David moving around in his study. The sound of his footsteps had become so familiar over the years that she barely noticed them anymore. Like the ticking of a clock you've lived with so long you forget it's there. But tonight, something felt different. David had been quiet during dinner. Not the comfortable silence of a couple who'd run out of things to say, but something heavier. Something that pressed against Margaret's chest and made it hard to breathe. She'd asked him twice if everything was okay. Both times, he'd given her that smile. The one that used to make her heart flutter when they were 23 and newly married, but now just looked tired. Margaret pulled her hands from the water and dried them on the kitchen towel, the one with little sunflowers that Emma had given her last Mother's Day. She could hear David clearing his throat in the other room. That was his tell. He always cleared his throat before saying something important. He'd done it before proposing. Before telling her he got the promotion that required them to move across the country. Before each of their children was born. She walked slowly toward his study, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors they'd refinished together 10 years ago. David had insisted they do it themselves to save money. They'd spent an entire weekend on their hands and knees, laughing when they got more stain on themselves than on the floor. Margaret remembered how he'd kissed her then, his hands leaving marks on her hips, both of them giddy with the simple joy of building something together. The study door was half open. David sat behind his mahogany desk, the one his father had left him. His laptop was closed, his hands folded in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and for just a moment, Margaret saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. It was the look of a man who'd already made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to share it. "David," she said softly, feeling the weight of 25 years in that single word. He gestured to the chair across from him. The formal one, the one clients sat in when he worked from home. Margaret had never sat there before. She'd always perched on the edge of his desk when they talked, or curled up in the reading chair by the window. Sitting in that chair felt wrong, like she was suddenly a stranger in her own home. "We need to talk," he said. 4 words. 4 simple words that had the power to change everything. Margaret lowered herself into the chair, her hands gripping the armrests. The leather was cold beneath her palms. "Okay," she managed, though her throat had gone dry. David looked down at his hands, then back up at her. In the lamplight, she could see the gray threading through his hair at the temples. When had that happened? When had they both gotten so much older? She remembered running her fingers through his hair on their wedding night, both of them young and beautiful and so certain that love was enough. "I've been thinking a lot lately," David began, his voice careful, measured. "About us. About our marriage." Margaret's heart started to pound. She'd heard those words before, in movies, in the stories friends whispered over wine. But she'd never imagined hearing them in her own life. Not after 25 years. Not after everything they'd built together. Thinking about what specifically, she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. David leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, he couldn't quite meet her eyes. About whether we're still happy. Whether this is still what we both want. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. This is still what we both want. Not what he wanted. What they both wanted. As if her happiness was somehow in question too. Are you unhappy, David? The question came out softer than she intended, almost pleading. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, she could hear a car passing by, the sound of someone's dog barking. Normal sounds. The sounds of a normal Tuesday evening in a normal neighborhood where normal people lived normal lives. But nothing about this moment felt normal. I'm 51 years old, Margaret, David finally said. 51. And I look at my life, and I wonder if this is all there is. Margaret felt like she'd been slapped. All there is. As if their life together, their home, their children, their quarter-century of memories was somehow not enough. As if she was not enough. What exactly are you saying? Her voice was sharper now, the shock giving way to something else. Something that tasted like fear and anger mixed together. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen 1,000 times. But tonight it looked different. Tonight it looked like the action of a man who'd already checked out, who was just going through the motions of a conversation he'd rehearsed in his head. I'm saying that I'm not sure I want to spend the rest of my life like this. Like what? Margaret demanded. Like what, David? In a beautiful home? With a wife who's stood by you through everything? With children who adore you? He flinched at the sharpness in her voice, but he didn't back down. That's just it, Margaret. The kids are grown. They don't need us anymore. Emma's got her own life in Boston. Michael's in grad school. They're gone. And now it's just us, and I look at you, and I don't know if this is still what I want. Each word was a knife. Margaret could feel them cutting into her, peeling away the layers of security she'd wrapped around herself. She thought about all the mornings she'd woken up early to make his coffee the way he liked it. All the dinners she'd cooked, the laundry she'd done, the life she'd built around his needs, his schedule, his dreams. She'd put her own career on hold when the kids were young. She'd been the one to stay up all night when they were sick. She'd been the one to manage the household, the social calendar, the endless details of a shared life while he focused on his career. And now he was telling her he wasn't sure if this was what he wanted. Margaret stood up slowly, her legs shaking. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're 51, and you're having some kind of midlife crisis, and instead of talking to me about it, instead of figuring out how we could make things better together, you've decided that the problem is our marriage? It's not a midlife crisis, David said, and there was something defensive in his tone now. I'm just being honest about what I'm feeling. Honest. Margaret almost laughed. When did you start feeling this way? Last week? Last month? Last year? How long have you been sitting here, in our home, letting me believe everything was fine while you were planning your exit? David stood up too, moving around the desk. For a moment, Margaret thought he might reach for her, might try to comfort her. But he stopped a few feet away, maintaining that distance that suddenly felt like a canyon between them. I met someone, he said quietly. The world tilted. Margaret grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds, syllables that her brain couldn't quite process into meaning. And then, all at once, they did. And the pain was so sharp, so sudden, that for a moment she couldn't breathe. You what? Her name is Vanessa. She's 32. She works in marketing at the firm. 32. 20 years younger than Margaret. Young enough to be their daughter. The age Margaret had been when she'd had Emma, when she'd still believed that love and marriage were forever, that promises meant something. How long? Margaret heard herself ask, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year. Margaret thought back over the past 6 months, trying to remember signs she'd missed. The late nights at the office he'd explained away as important projects. The new cologne. The way he'd started going to the gym more regularly. She'd been happy about that, had encouraged him to take care of himself. Had she been that blind? Or had she just chosen not to see? Have you slept with her? The question came out flat, emotionless. David's silence was answer enough. Margaret felt something inside her crack. Not break, not yet. But crack. Like ice at the beginning of spring, still solid on the surface but fracturing underneath. I want a divorce, David said, and his voice was gentler now, as if softness could somehow cushion the blow. Vanessa and I, we're in love. She makes me feel young again. She makes me feel like anything is possible. And I know this is hard to hear, but I have to be honest with myself about what I want. I want someone who's excited about life. Someone who still has energy and passion. Someone who... Young, Margaret interrupted, her voice cold. You want someone young. Someone whose body hasn't changed from carrying your children. Someone who doesn't have stretch marks or gray hair or wrinkles. Someone shiny and new who hasn't spent the last 25 years of her life putting your needs before her own. David looked uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. I'm not trying to hurt you, Margaret. I'm just trying to be honest. Honest. There was that word again. As if honesty somehow excused betrayal. As if telling the truth after months of lies made any of this acceptable. Get out, Margaret said quietly. What? Get out of this room. Out of this house. Right now. I can't look at you. Margaret, we need to talk about this like adults. No, she cut him off, and her voice was shaking now, all that carefully controlled emotion starting to bubble up. No, we don't. You don't get to blow up our entire life and then demand that I sit here and process it with you like this is some kind of business meeting. You don't get to tell me you've been sleeping with someone half your age for 6 months and then ask me to be reasonable about it. I know you're upset. Upset? Margaret laughed, and it was a harsh, broken sound. Upset is when you forget our anniversary. Upset is when you leave dirty dishes in the sink. This isn't upset, David. This is devastation. This is you taking everything we built together and setting it on fire because some young woman at your office made you feel special. She's not just some woman, David said, and there was something almost defensive in his voice now. She understands me. She listens to me. She makes me feel valued. And I don't? Margaret's voice rose. I, who gave up my career to raise your children. I, who moved across the country for your job. I, who has spent the last 25 years making sure your life ran smoothly. I don't make you feel valued. It's different, David insisted. You're my wife. It's comfortable with you. It's routine. But with Vanessa, everything feels new and exciting. Anne. Stop, Margaret commanded, holding up her hand. Just stop. I don't want to hear about how exciting your mistress is. I don't want to hear about how she makes you feel. I don't care. But she did care. God help her, she cared so much it was like a physical pain in her chest. 25 years. A quarter of a century. They'd been married longer than Vanessa had been alive. How had they gotten here? How had the man who'd promised to love her forever become someone who could stand in their home, surrounded by the life they'd built together, and tell her he wanted someone younger? I'll pack a bag, David said after a long silence. I can stay at a hotel tonight. We can figure out the details later, with lawyers. Lawyers. The word felt surreal. They were supposed to grow old together. They were supposed to be one of the couples who made it. Margaret thought about all the weddings they'd attended over the years, all the toasts they'd made to other couples about the secret to a lasting marriage. What a joke. What a cruel, terrible joke. David left the room, and Margaret stood there alone, listening to his footsteps on the stairs. She heard the closet in their bedroom open, heard the sound of a suitcase being pulled down from the top shelf. The same suitcase he'd used on their honeymoon to Italy. She'd found it on sale at a department store, had been so proud of the good deal she'd gotten. Now the sound of its wheels on the hardwood floor above her head felt like a countdown to the end of everything she'd known. She walked to the living room window and looked out at the street. The roses were barely visible now in the darkness. 25 years ago, they'd moved into this house as newlyweds, full of dreams and plans. They'd made love in every room before the furniture arrived. They'd painted the nursery together when she was pregnant with Emma. They'd hosted countless dinners and parties and holidays. Every corner of this house held a memory. And now David was packing a bag to leave it all behind for a woman who hadn't even been born when they'd said their vows. Margaret heard him coming down the stairs. She turned to see him standing in the hallway, suitcase in hand, looking uncertain for the first time that evening. For just a moment, he looked like the boy she'd fallen in love with in college. Vulnerable. Scared. Human. "Margaret," he started, "I never meant for it to happen this way." "But it did," she said simply. "You made choices, David. You chose to pursue her. You chose to betray me. You chose to throw away our marriage. Don't stand there now and pretend this just happened to you, like you're some passive victim of circumstances." "I do love you," he said, and his eyes were wet. "I've loved you for 25 years. But I'm not in love with you anymore. And I don't think you're in love with me either. We've just been going through the motions." Margaret felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not now. Not in front of him. You don't get to decide what I feel," she said coldly. "You don't get to tell me I'm not in love with you just because it makes this easier for you. I wake up every day and choose you. I chose you yesterday, and the day before that, and every single day for 25 years. The fact that you stopped choosing me doesn't mean I stopped choosing you." David opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly say to that? They stood there in the hallway, the space between them feeling like miles, until finally he picked up his suitcase and walked to the door. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "We can talk about next steps." Margaret didn't respond. She just watched as he opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, and walked to his car. She watched as he loaded his suitcase into the trunk. Watched as he got into the driver's seat. Watched as the taillights disappeared down Maple Street, taking with them everything she'd thought her life was. Only then, alone in the house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, did Margaret allow herself to cry. She sank down onto the floor right there in the hallway, her back against the wall, and let the tears come. Great, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. 25 years. 25 years of her life, poured into a marriage that her husband had just walked away from for someone younger. Someone with firmer skin and brighter eyes and no history weighing her down. How long Margaret sat there, she wasn't sure. Long enough for her tears to dry and leave her face feeling tight and swollen. Long enough for the house to settle into its nighttime creaks and groans. Long enough for the shock to begin wearing off, leaving behind something harder and sharper. Anger. Margaret pulled herself up off the floor and walked back to the kitchen. The dishes were still in the sink where she'd left them. The coffee maker was set for tomorrow morning, ready to brew coffee for two. She'd done that on autopilot, the way she'd done it every night for years. Making sure David had his coffee ready when he woke up. Taking care of him. Always taking care of him. She unplugged the coffee maker. Then she walked upstairs to their bedroom. His side of the closet gaped open where he'd grabbed clothes in a hurry. His nightstand still held his reading glasses and the mystery novel he'd been working through. The bed was still made with the sheets she'd changed that morning, hospital corners neat and tight the way he preferred. Margaret grabbed his pillow and threw it across the room. Then she grabbed everything else from his nightstand and threw that too. The glasses clattered against the wall. The book landed splayed open on the floor. It felt good. It felt like doing something instead of just standing there drowning in her own pain. She was breathing hard, standing in the middle of the bedroom, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. For one wild moment, she thought it might be David. Maybe he'd realized what a terrible mistake he'd made. Maybe he was calling to say he was coming home, that he was sorry, that they could fix this. But it wasn't David. It was Emma. The text was simple. Just checking in, Mom. Love you. Emma. Their daughter. 25 years old and living her own life in Boston, with no idea that her parents' marriage had just imploded. How was Margaret supposed to tell her? How was she supposed to explain that her father had left for someone barely older than Emma herself? Margaret sat down on the edge of the bed, David's half looking achingly empty beside her. She thought about texting Emma back, but what would she say? Everything's fine, honey. The biggest lie she'd ever told. She set the phone down without responding. The house was so quiet. For 25 years, it had been filled with noise. Children laughing and crying. Music playing. Conversations over dinner. The television on in the background. David's voice on work calls. The sounds of a family, of a life being lived. Now there was nothing but silence pressing in from all sides. Margaret lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. She and David had painted it together when they first moved in. Eggshell white. Neutral. Safe. Everything about their life had been so carefully constructed, so deliberately planned. They'd done everything right. They'd been responsible. They'd saved for retirement. They'd raised good kids. They'd been faithful, well, she had been faithful. They'd built something solid and real. And he'd thrown it all away for someone younger. The thought circled back, the way it would over and over in the coming days. Someone younger. As if youth was all that mattered. As if the years Margaret had invested, the life she'd built, the person she'd become meant nothing compared to smooth skin and wide eyes and the thrill of something new. Margaret closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept racing, replaying every moment of the evening. Every word David had said. The way he'd looked at her, or more accurately, the way he'd looked away. The casual cruelty of his confession. 6 months. He'd been lying to her for 6 months. She thought about Vanessa. 32 years old. Probably beautiful, certainly young enough not to have any visible signs of aging. No gray hair or smile lines or the softness that came with middle age. Margaret had seen the way David looked at younger women lately. She'd noticed but told herself it was harmless. Men noticed attractive women. It didn't mean anything. Except it had meant something. It had meant everything. Around 3 a.m, Margaret finally gave up on sleep. She got out of bed and went back downstairs, moving through the dark house like a ghost. In the kitchen, she made herself tea, something herbal and calming that she didn't really want but didn't know what else to do. The ritual of it was comforting. Boil water. Steep the bag. Add honey. Simple steps she could follow when nothing else made sense. She took her tea to the living room and curled up on the couch, pulling an Afghan over her legs. Through the window, she could see the first hints of dawn starting to lighten the eastern sky. Another day. The first day of her new life. The life where she was a woman whose husband had left her for someone younger. What would people say when they found out? Margaret thought about their friends, their neighbors, the couples they'd spent so many evenings with over the years. Would they take sides? Would they pity her? Would they whisper about how she must not have been enough, must not have kept him interested, must have let herself go? The thought made her angry all over again. This wasn't her failure. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd kept every promise she'd made. She'd been a good wife, a good mother, a good partner. David was the one who'd broken their vows. David was the one who'd decided that 25 years of marriage was worth less than the excitement of someone new. As the sun came up, painting the living room in shades of gold and pink, Margaret made a decision. She wasn't going to let David's betrayal define her. She wasn't going to be the pitiable woman who'd been left for a younger model. She wasn't going to shrink away or hide or pretend this wasn't devastating. She was going to fight back. Not for David. She was done fighting for a man who didn't value what they'd built together. But for herself. For her dignity. For the life she deserved. Margaret set down her tea and picked up her phone. It was early, but she didn't care. She scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for. Laura Martinez. Her best friend since college. The one person who would understand, who would be on her side no matter what. The phone rang 3 times before Laura answered, her voice thick with sleep. Margaret? What's wrong? Is everything okay? No, Margaret said, and her voice broke on the word. No, everything is not okay. David left me. He's been having an affair with a woman at his office. Someone half his age. And he wants a divorce. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. That bastard, Laura said, suddenly fully awake. That absolute bastard. Where are you? Are you home? I'm coming over right now. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Laura interrupted. You're my best friend, and you need me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Put on coffee. The real stuff, not that herbal nonsense. Despite everything, Margaret felt a small smile tug at her lips. Okay. And Margaret? Laura's voice softened. I'm so sorry. But you're going to be okay. I promise you, you're going to be more than okay. After they hung up, Margaret did as instructed. She made coffee, the strong kind that Laura loved. The smell of it filling the kitchen felt like a small act of defiance. David wasn't here to drink it. This coffee was for her and for Laura. For female friendship and solidarity and survival. True to her word, Laura arrived exactly 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them. She pulled Margaret into a fierce hug, and for the second time that night, Margaret cried. But these tears felt different. Less like despair and more like release. Tell me everything, Laura said, pulling back and looking Margaret in the eye. Don't leave anything out. So Margaret did. She told her about the conversation in David's study, about Vanessa, about the 6 months of lies. She told her about the words that had cut deepest. Someone younger. Someone exciting. Someone who made him feel alive. Laura listened, her expression growing darker with every sentence. When Margaret finally finished, Laura took a long sip of her coffee and set the mug down with deliberate care. Okay, she said. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to call the best divorce lawyer in the city. I know someone. She's ruthless, and she's exactly what you need. Second, you're not going to let David control the narrative here. He cheated. He destroyed your marriage. And he's going to pay for it, literally and figuratively. Margaret nodded slowly. I don't want to be vindictive, she started, but Laura cut her off. Vindictive? Margaret, he cheated on you for 6 months. He's leaving you for someone barely older than your daughter. This isn't about being vindictive. This is about protecting yourself and making sure he doesn't get to walk away from 25 years of marriage without consequences. Laura was right. Margaret knew she was right. But part of her still felt guilty for even thinking about fighting back. That was what 25 years of putting someone else first did to you. It made you feel guilty for protecting yourself. What would you do? Margaret asked suddenly. If you were in my position, what would you do? Laura didn't hesitate. I'd make him regret ever taking me for granted. I'd show him exactly what he was giving up. And I'd make sure that when this was all over, I came out stronger than before. The words resonated somewhere deep in Margaret's chest. Make him regret it. Show him what he was giving up. Become stronger. Yes, Margaret said softly. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. She spent the rest of the morning with Laura, planning her next steps. Call the lawyer. Document everything about David's affair. Protect her financial interests. But more than that, focus on herself. On rebuilding. On becoming the woman she'd lost somewhere in the middle of being a wife and mother. After Laura left, promising to check in later, Margaret stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Really looked at herself for the first time in a long time. She saw the lines around her eyes, the gray streaking through her dark hair, the softness at her jawline that hadn't been there when she was 32. She saw a woman who'd lived, who'd raised children, who'd built a home and a life. And she saw something else too. Strength. Resilience. The kind that came from surviving heartbreak. David wanted someone younger? Fine. Let him have his midlife crisis with Vanessa. Margaret was going to take this opportunity to become someone better. Not younger. Better. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. Can we talk? Margaret stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, slowly and deliberately. No. Talk to my lawyer. You'll be hearing from her soon. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she blocked his number. It was a small thing, but it felt like taking back power. For 25 years, she'd been available to David whenever he needed her. No more. He'd made his choice. Now she was making hers. Margaret walked to the closet and pulled out the box she'd shoved on the top shelf years ago. Inside were remnants of the woman she'd been before marriage and children. Old journals filled with dreams and ambitions. Photos of herself in college, laughing with friends, so full of possibility. A folder of sketches from when she'd thought about pursuing art professionally. She'd given up so much. Not because David had asked her to, but because that's what you did. You compromised. You adjusted. You put your family first. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being Margaret Shen with her own dreams and become just David's wife, Emma, and Michael's mother. Well, David didn't want to be her husband anymore. And her children were grown, living their own lives. So who was Margaret now? Who did she want to be? The question should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like an invitation. A chance to discover who she could become when she wasn't trying to be everything to everyone else. Margaret spent the rest of the day going through the house with new eyes. Everything here represented their life together. The furniture they'd picked out. The artwork they'd collected. The photos on every wall and surface. 25 years of accumulated memories. But they were joint memories. Shared history. And while she couldn't erase them, she could start to build something new alongside them. She started small. She moved David's favorite chair out of the living room and into the garage. It had always been his spot, his domain. Now it was just taking up space. In its place, she moved her reading chair from the corner where it had been relegated years ago. Right in front of the fireplace, the best spot in the room. It was symbolic more than anything. But symbols mattered. This was her house now. Her space. Her life to rebuild however she wanted. As evening fell, Margaret made herself dinner. Not the kind of meal she would have made for David, carefully considering his preferences. But something she loved. Pasta with too much garlic, a glass of wine, chocolate cake for dessert. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, sitting at the kitchen table with a book propped up in front of her. She was halfway through her meal when she heard a key in the front door. Her heart jumped. David. He still had his key. But when the door opened, it wasn't David. It was Emma, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face concerned. "Mom," she said, rushing over. "Dad called me. He told me what happened. Are you okay?" And just like that, the careful composure Margaret had maintained all day crumbled. She started crying again, and Emma wrapped her arms around her, holding her tight while she sobbed out all the pain and anger and grief she'd been holding inside. How could he do this? Margaret gasped between tears. How could he just throw everything away? "I don't know, Mom," Emma said, her own voice thick with tears. "I don't understand it either. I'm so angry at him. So angry." They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, clinging to each other in the kitchen. Eventually, Margaret pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "Are you kidding?" Emma said. "You just found out your husband has been cheating on you. You're allowed to fall apart. You're allowed to be devastated. Your father said he wants a divorce." Emma's jaw tightened. "He told me." He also tried to explain about Vanessa, like I would somehow understand. Like being attracted to someone else is a good reason to destroy your marriage. "You talked to her? About her?" Emma nodded. "He wanted me to know that she makes him happy. Like that was supposed to make this okay. Like his happiness is more important than honoring his commitments or thinking about how this affects you." Margaret felt a surge of love for her daughter. "Emma, I don't want you to feel like you have to choose sides." "I already have," Emma interrupted fiercely. "I choose you. What Dad did is unforgivable. And if he thinks I'm going to welcome his mistress into my life with open arms, he's delusional." They talked late into the night, Emma refusing to leave. She'd taken time off work, she said, to be here for her mother. They could figure out the details later, but right now, Margaret needed family. Real family. The kind that showed up when things fell apart. Around midnight, curled up together on the couch under blankets, Emma said quietly, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think this is going to be the making of you, Mom. I think Dad leaving is going to force you to remember who you are outside of being his wife. And I think when you do, you're going to be amazing." Margaret looked at her daughter, this beautiful, strong woman she'd raised, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe this wasn't just an ending. Maybe it was also a beginning. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Emma replied. "And Mom? Dad is going to regret this. I guarantee it. Men like him always do. They chase something shiny and new, and by the time they realize what they had, it's too late." Margaret held on to those words like a lifeline. She didn't know if Emma was right about David regretting his choice. But she knew one thing for certain. She was done being the woman who waited around to be chosen. Done being the woman who made herself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Done being anything other than exactly who she wanted to be. If David wanted someone younger, she'd give him something even better. She'd give him a glimpse of the woman he'd taken for granted for so long. The woman he'd assumed would always be there, always be available, always be willing to forgive and accommodate and adjust. That woman was gone. And in her place, Margaret Chen was going to build something new. Something stronger. Something that belonged entirely to her. It was going to hurt. God, it was going to hurt so much. The road ahead was full of difficult conversations and legal battles and lonely nights. But Margaret was done running from pain. She was going to walk straight through it, and she was going to come out the other side transformed. As she finally drifted off to sleep that night, Emma beside her, Margaret's last thought was simple but profound. David wanted someone younger. Well, Margaret was going to give him exactly what he'd asked for. Just not in the way he expected. She was going to give him a choice. One choice. And what he did with it would determine not just his future, but hers as well. The game had changed. And Margaret Chen was done playing defense. The morning after Emma arrived, Margaret woke with a strange sense of clarity. The kind that comes after crying yourself empty, after hitting rock bottom and realizing the only direction left is up. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, and for a moment, just a single blessed moment, she forgot what had happened. Then reality crashed back in, heavy and suffocating. But this time, underneath the pain, there was something else. Determination. Emma was already awake, making breakfast downstairs. Margaret could smell coffee and hear her daughter moving around the kitchen, humming softly. The normalcy of it was jarring. How could the world just continue like nothing had changed when everything had changed? Margaret showered and dressed carefully. Not in the comfortable clothes she usually wore around the house, but in real clothes. Jeans that actually fit properly, a crisp white blouse, even a touch of makeup. If she was going to rebuild her life, she needed to look like someone who had her life together. Fake it until you make it, wasn't that what people said? When she came downstairs, Emma looked up from the stove and smiled. There she is, she said warmly. I made your favorite. French toast with strawberries. You didn't have to do that, Margaret said, but she was grateful. Small acts of kindness felt enormous right now. I wanted to. Emma plated the food and brought it to the table. Besides, we need fuel. We have a big day ahead of us. We do. Emma pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. I made a list. First, we're calling that lawyer Laura recommended. Then we're going to the bank to make sure Dad can't drain any joint accounts. Then we're going to your hair salon because you've been talking about changing your color for 3 years and never doing it. And then, Emma paused dramatically, we're going shopping. Emma, I don't know if I'm ready for all that. You're not, Emma agreed. But you're going to do it anyway. Because sitting here feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to change what happened. Action is what changes things. Margaret looked at her daughter and felt a swell of pride. When had Emma gotten so wise? When had she stopped being the little girl who needed her mother's guidance and become the woman offering it instead? Okay, Margaret said softly. Let's do it. The lawyer's office was in downtown, a sleek building with glass walls and modern furniture. Jennifer Park was exactly as Laura had described her. Sharp, professional, and absolutely no nonsense. She was in her early 40s, Margaret guessed, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than Margaret's monthly grocery budget. Tell me everything, Jennifer said once they were settled in her office. Don't leave anything out, even if you think it's not important. So Margaret told the story again. With Emma sitting beside her, holding her hand, she recounted every detail. The conversation in David's study. The revelation about Vanessa. The 6 months of lies. The request for a divorce. Jennifer took notes, her expression unchanging. When Margaret finished, she set down her pen and looked directly at her. Here's the situation, she began. You've been married for 25 years. That's a long-term marriage, which means you're entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets. The affair complicates things in your favor. While adultery doesn't always impact the financial settlement, it can influence the court's decisions, especially regarding spousal support. I don't want to be vindictive, Margaret started, but Jennifer held up her hand. This isn't about vindictiveness. This is about protecting your interests after 25 years of marriage. You put your career on hold to raise children and support his career advancement. You're entitled to compensation for that investment. Now, tell me about your finances. They spent the next hour going through everything. Bank accounts, retirement funds, the house, David's business interests. Margaret was embarrassed to realize how little she knew about their complete financial picture. David had always handled the money. He'd given her an allowance for household expenses and never questioned how she spent it, but the big picture? That had always been his domain. We're going to need full financial disclosure, Jennifer said, making more notes. I'll file a motion for that immediately. In the meantime, I want you to do something for me. Go home and document everything. Print out bank statements. Make copies of any important documents. If David has a home office, photograph everything. I know that feels invasive, but we need to protect you. He moved out, Margaret said. He took some clothes and his laptop, but most of his things are still at the house. Good. Jennifer's smile was sharp. Then you have access to everything we need. Do it today, before he thinks to come back for them. After the lawyer's office, they went to the bank. The manager, a man Margaret had dealt with for years, looked uncomfortable as she explained what she needed. He kept glancing between Margaret and Emma as if hoping one of them would tell him this was all a misunderstanding. I'm going to need you to freeze the joint accounts, Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. My lawyer advised that I need to protect my assets during the divorce proceedings. The word divorce felt strange in her mouth. Final. Real. Of course, Mrs. Chen. The manager typed on his computer. I'll also recommend that you open a new account in just your name. We can transfer half of the joint funds there. That's standard procedure in these situations. These situations. As if Margaret was just another statistic. Another woman whose marriage had failed. But she nodded and signed the papers he put in front of her, watching as numbers moved on computer screens, literally dividing a life she'd thought was permanent. As they left the bank, Emma squeezed her hand. You're doing great, Mom. I know this is hard. Hard didn't begin to cover it. Every step felt like walking through concrete. But Margaret kept moving forward because the alternative was standing still, and standing still meant drowning in the pain. The hair salon was next. Margaret had been going to the same stylist for 15 years, a chatty woman named Rosa who knew everything about everyone. When Margaret walked in, Rosa's face lit up. Margaret. I wasn't expecting you today. What can I do for you? Margaret took a deep breath. I want to change everything. Rosa's eyes widened. Everything? Everything. Cut it shorter. Change the color. Make me look different. Make me look new. Rosa glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. Then she smiled. Okay. Let's do this. But first, tell me what's going on. You don't walk in here asking for a complete makeover unless something major has happened. And because Rosa had always been a good listener, because Margaret needed to tell someone outside her immediate circle, she told her. About David, about Vanessa, about the divorce. Rosa's expression grew darker with every word. That absolute bastard, Rosa said when Margaret finished, echoing Laura's words from the night before. After 25 years? For some young thing at his office? Men like that make me sick. She studied Margaret's reflection in the mirror, running her fingers through her hair thoughtfully. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut it to your shoulders. Give you some layers, some movement. And we're going to add some highlights. Nothing drastic, but enough to brighten your whole face. When we're done, you're going to look 5 years younger and 10 times more confident. As Rosa worked, she talked. She told Margaret about her own divorce, 10 years ago. How devastating it had been, how she'd thought she'd never recover. But she had. And now she was happily remarried to a man who actually appreciated her. The thing is, Rosa said, sectioning Margaret's hair, men like your husband, they think the grass is greener. They think young and exciting is better than history and partnership. But you know what? In 6 months, a year, maybe 2, that excitement wears off. And then they're left with someone they don't really know, someone they don't have a foundation with. And they realize what they gave up. You think David will regret it? Margaret asked. Rosa met her eyes in the mirror. I know he will. But here's the thing, by the time he does, you need to be so far past caring that his regret means nothing to you. That's the real victory. Not him coming back, but you not wanting him to. The words settled into Margaret's chest like seeds. She watched in the mirror as Rosa cut and colored, watched as her hair transformed. When Rosa finally spun her around to see the finished result, Margaret barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked younger, yes, but more than that, she looked alive. Alert. Ready. You look amazing, Emma breathed from her seat nearby. Absolutely amazing, Mom. Margaret stared at her reflection. The gray was gone, replaced by rich chestnut brown with golden highlights that caught the light. The cut framed her face in a way that made her cheekbones look more prominent, her eyes bigger. She looked like herself, but also like a newer version. A better version. Thank you, she whispered to Rosa. Don't thank me yet. Rosa grinned. Wait until we do your makeup. An hour later, Margaret walked out of the salon feeling like a different person. Emma had been right. Action did change things. Every step she took away from the life she'd known, every small act of transformation, made her feel a little bit stronger. The shopping came next. Emma dragged her to stores Margaret had walked past 1,000 times but never entered. Places with trendy clothes and loud music and sales associates who all seemed impossibly young and fashionable. "I don't know about this," Margaret said, eyeing a dress that looked far too short and far too tight for a 51-year-old woman. "Stop thinking like that," Emma said firmly. "You're 51, not 91. And you look incredible. Try it on." So Margaret did. She tried on the dress and a dozen other things that Emma pulled from racks. Skinny jeans she'd never have considered. A leather jacket that made her feel edgy and powerful. A deep red blouse that Emma insisted brought out her eyes. Heels that were probably too high but made her legs look amazing. With each outfit, Margaret felt herself shedding another layer of the person she'd been. The comfortable, practical wife who dressed for function rather than fashion. The woman who'd stopped trying because there was no one to try for. But that was the revelation. She didn't need to dress for David. She could dress for herself. Because looking good made her feel good, and feeling good was exactly what she needed right now. By the time they loaded their shopping bags into the car, Margaret was exhausted but energized. It was a strange combination, but it felt right. Like her body was tired but her spirit was waking up after a long sleep. Emma drove them home, chattering about what they'd bought, making plans for how Margaret could style different pieces. As they pulled onto Maple Street, Margaret saw a familiar car in her driveway. David. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't ready for this. She'd been doing so well, moving forward, taking action. But seeing his car there, knowing he was in the house, brought all the pain crashing back. "You don't have to talk to him," Emma said immediately. "We can turn around. Go somewhere else until he leaves." But Margaret shook her head. "No. This is my house. I'm not running away from my own home." They pulled into the driveway behind David's car. As Margaret got out, the front door opened and David stepped out onto the porch. He froze when he saw her, his eyes widening. "Margaret?" He stared at her like he'd never seen her before. "Your hair. You look different." That was her first victory. The shock on his face, the way his eyes traveled over her new appearance. She looked good, and he could see it. "Good. What are you doing here, David?" Her voice was cold, controlled. "I came to get some things from my office. And I hoped we could talk." He glanced at Emma, who was glaring at him with undisguised hostility. "Maybe in private?" "There's nothing to talk about," Margaret said. "I told you to communicate through my lawyer." "Margaret, please." David took a step toward her. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But we've been together for 25 years. Surely we can handle this like adults without getting lawyers involved." "You got lawyers involved the moment you decided to cheat on me and ask for a divorce," Margaret shot back. "You don't get to do that and then demand I handle things on your terms. I'm not trying to control anything. I just think we could settle this amicably, without all the drama and legal fees." Emma made a sound of disgust. "Drama? You're calling Mom wanting a fair settlement drama? You're the one who created this situation, Dad. You're the one who blew up this family." "Emma, this doesn't concern you," David said, his tone hardening. "The hell it doesn't," Emma fired back. "You're my father. She's my mother. You destroyed my family. That absolutely concerns me." Margaret put a hand on Emma's arm. "It's okay, sweetheart. Let me handle this." She turned back to David. "You have 10 minutes to get whatever you need from your office. Then I want you gone. And next time, call before you come over. This is my home now. Your home." David's expression shifted to something defensive. "This is our home. We bought it together. And we'll divide it in the divorce settlement. Until then, you moved out. You don't get to just come and go as you please. For a moment, David looked like he wanted to argue. Then he must have seen something in Margaret's face, some new hardness that hadn't been there before, because he just nodded tightly and went back inside. Margaret and Emma followed, but Margaret stood in the hallway, arms crossed, while David gathered papers from his office. She refused to give him privacy, refused to make this easy or comfortable. He'd forfeited that right. When he finally emerged with a box of files, he paused in front of her. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "Then you shouldn't have slept with someone else," Margaret replied, her voice like ice. "You shouldn't have lied to me for 6 months. You shouldn't have told me you wanted someone younger, as if our entire life together meant nothing. It did mean something. It still does. Margaret, I cared about you." Cared. Past tense. Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Get out, David. Get out of my house." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He walked to the door, box under his arm. Before leaving, he turned back one more time. "You look really good," he said, and there was something in his voice. Regret? Confusion? Margaret didn't care enough to figure it out. "I know," she said simply. And she closed the door in his face. As soon as he was gone, Margaret's knees went weak. She slumped against the door, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her. "That was incredible," Emma said, her voice full of pride. "Mom, that was absolutely incredible. Did you see his face?" He couldn't believe it. Margaret started laughing. It came out shaky at first, then stronger. She'd done it. She'd faced him and held her ground. She hadn't cried or begged or made it easy for him. She'd been strong. "Come on," Emma said, grabbing the shopping bags. "Let's go try on all your new clothes again. And then we're going to order the most expensive takeout we can find and eat it right out of the containers while watching terrible reality TV." "That sounds perfect," Margaret said. They spent the rest of the evening doing exactly that. Margaret modeled her new clothes for Emma, and they laughed at the absurdity of some of the trendier pieces. They ordered Thai food and ate it sprawled on the living room floor. They watched a dating show where people made terrible decisions, and for a few hours, Margaret's own terrible situation seemed a little less overwhelming. But later, after Emma had gone to bed in her old room, Margaret lay awake staring at the ceiling. The high of the day had worn off, leaving behind the familiar ache. No matter how good her hair looked or how many new clothes she bought, it didn't change the fundamental truth. Her husband had betrayed her. Her marriage was over. 25 years had been reduced to legal proceedings and asset division. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, opening her messages out of habit. There were texts from Laura, checking in. From a few other friends who'd heard the news. But also, she noticed, there was a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. "Mrs. Chen, this is Vanessa. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. David and I tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes love just happens. I hope you can understand." Margaret read the message 3 times, her anger building with each pass. The audacity of it. The sheer nerve of this woman to reach out, to justify what she'd done, to ask for understanding. Sometimes love just happens. As if love was some uncontrollable force, as if Vanessa and David had been helpless victims of their own emotions. As if Margaret's pain was just collateral damage in their great romance. Her fingers flew across the screen as she typed a response. "Don't contact me again. What you and David have isn't love. It's selfishness and betrayal. Love doesn't destroy families. Love doesn't lie and sneak around for 6 months. Love doesn't disrespect commitments and hurt innocent people. You're welcome to David. You're welcome to the guilt that will eventually catch up to both of you. But don't you dare ask me to understand or approve. And don't ever contact me again." She hit send before she could reconsider, then blocked the number. Her heart was racing, but she felt oddly satisfied. She'd stood up for herself twice in one day. To David and now to his mistress. The next few weeks fell into a strange new rhythm. Emma had to return to Boston and her job, but she called every day. Laura came over regularly, usually bearing wine and gossip and unwavering support. Jennifer, the lawyer, kept Margaret updated on the legal proceedings. David had hired his own attorney, and the divorce was officially underway. Margaret threw herself into action. She went through David's office as Jennifer had instructed, documenting everything. She found things that made her angry all over again. Restaurant receipts from places he'd claimed to be at business dinners, but she recognized them as romantic spots. Hotel bills. Credit card charges at jewelry stores. He'd been buying Vanessa gifts while Margaret was at home, oblivious. She photographed everything and sent it all to Jennifer, who responded with grim satisfaction. This is exactly what we need. But Margaret didn't just focus on the divorce. She focused on herself. She joined a gym and started working out with a trainer, a no-nonsense woman named Keisha who pushed her harder than she'd ever pushed herself. The physical exertion felt good, like she was literally building herself stronger. She reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with over the years. Women she'd known in college or at previous jobs, relationships that had fallen by the wayside as she'd devoted herself to family. They met for coffee and lunch, and Margaret was surprised by how good it felt to socialize without David, to be just Margaret instead of Margaret and David. She even started painting again. She'd loved art in college, had dreamed of being an artist before she'd gotten pregnant with Emma, and those dreams had been set aside. Now she set up an easel in the spare bedroom and lost herself in color and form. Her paintings were dark at first, all angry reds and blacks, swirling chaos that reflected her inner turmoil. But slowly, gradually, lighter colors started to appear. One evening, about a month after David had left, Margaret was in her makeshift studio when her phone rang. It was Michael, her son, calling from his graduate program in California. "Mom," his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I just talked to Dad. He told me about Vanessa. About the divorce. Oh honey, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you myself, but I wasn't sure how. How could he do this?" Michael interrupted. "How could he just throw away our family like that? For some woman none of us even know?" "I don't know, sweetheart." Margaret set down her paintbrush and walked to the window. "I've asked myself that same question 1,000 times. He tried to explain it to me. Tried to make me understand about finding happiness and not living a lie. But Mom, you're not a lie. Your marriage wasn't a lie. What he did is just selfish and cruel." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. Having her children's support meant everything. "I appreciate you saying that, honey. But I don't want you to feel like you have to choose sides. He's still your father. He's still my father, but that doesn't mean I have to approve of what he did." Michael's voice softened. "How are you holding up? Really?" "Some days are better than others," Margaret admitted. "But I'm managing. I'm actually doing more than managing. I'm starting to figure out who I am without him." "Good. That's good, Mom. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who values you." After they hung up, Margaret stood at the window for a long time, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Lights came on in houses up and down the street. Families having dinner, living their lives, unaware of the drama unfolding next door. She thought about what Michael had said. She deserved to be happy. She deserved someone who valued her. But more than that, she deserved to value herself. That was the real lesson in all of this. She'd spent so long defining herself through her relationships, as David's wife, as Emma and Michael's mother, that she'd forgotten how to just be Margaret. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she found a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of roses. Like, absurdly enormous. Probably 3 dozen roses, perfectly arranged. "Margaret Chen?" the delivery man asked. "Yes. These are for you. He handed her the bouquet and a small envelope, then left. Margaret carried the flowers inside, her heart sinking. She knew who they were from before she even opened the card. David's handwriting was familiar, his message brief. I miss you. Can we talk? Please. She stared at the card for a long moment. A month ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago, receiving flowers from David would have made her hope. Would have made her think maybe he'd made a mistake, maybe they could work things out. But now? Now she just felt tired. And a little insulted. Did he really think flowers would fix anything? Did he think a grand gesture could erase 6 months of lies and betrayal? Margaret carried the flowers to the kitchen and left them on the counter. Then she picked up her phone and called Laura. He sent me roses, she said when Laura answered. Oh hell no, Laura responded immediately. What did the card say? Margaret read it aloud. Laura was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? Nothing, Margaret said. I'm not going to do anything. He made his choice. These flowers don't change that. Good girl, Laura said approvingly. Don't let him think he can waltz back in with some roses and pretty words. You're worth more than that. After hanging up, Margaret looked at the roses again. They were beautiful, she had to admit. Probably expensive. But they were also empty. A symbol without substance. David hadn't changed. He was just realizing what he'd lost. The next day, Margaret boxed up the roses and dropped them off at a local nursing home. The staff was delighted, distributing them among the residents. Margaret watched an elderly woman's face light up as she received a bouquet, and she felt satisfied. At least now the flowers were bringing joy to someone who deserved it. David didn't give up though. Over the next week, there were more deliveries. Chocolates. A piece of jewelry. A handwritten letter explaining how much he missed her, how he'd made a terrible mistake, how they could work through this if she'd just give him a chance. Each gift, each message, Margaret donated or threw away. She didn't respond. She didn't acknowledge them. She just kept moving forward with her life, and with the divorce proceedings. Jennifer called her one afternoon with an update. We have a court date, she said. 4 weeks from now. But Margaret, there's something else. David's attorney reached out. He wants to settle out of court. What does that mean? It means he's willing to negotiate. Probably because he realizes how bad this looks, the affair, the financial evidence, everything. He's hoping to avoid a messy court battle. What are they offering? Jennifer rattled off numbers and terms that made Margaret's head spin. It was generous, more than she'd expected. The house would be hers, plus a significant portion of their retirement accounts and continued spousal support for several years. That's a good offer, Jennifer admitted. Better than I expected him to make. But it's your decision. We can push for more, or we can accept and move on. Margaret thought about it. Part of her wanted to push, wanted to make David pay for what he'd done. But a bigger part just wanted it over. Wanted to close this chapter and start the next one. Let's settle, she said finally. I'm ready to move on. As the weeks passed and the legal details were finalized, Margaret noticed something interesting. She started seeing David around town more often. At the grocery store where she shopped. At the coffee shop she frequented. At the park where she'd started taking morning walks. At first, she thought it was coincidence. But it happened too often to be random. He was seeking her out, manufacturing chances to run into her. And each time, he looked worse. Tired. Stressed. Not at all like a man deliriously happy in his new relationship. The first few times, Margaret avoided him, changing direction or leaving quickly. But one Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after he'd moved out, she was having coffee at her favorite cafe when he walked in. Their eyes met across the room, and this time, Margaret didn't look away. David approached slowly, like he wasn't sure of his welcome. Can I sit? He asked when he reached her table. Margaret gestured to the empty chair. It's a free country. He sat down, and they looked at each other in silence for a moment. Up close, Margaret could see the toll the past weeks had taken on him. There were new lines around his eyes, and his skin had a grayish tint that suggested too little sleep and too much stress. "You look good," he said finally. "Really good." "I know," Margaret replied, echoing her words from that day at the house. David winced. "I deserve that. I deserve all of this." He ran a hand through his hair. "Margaret, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I got your gifts. But you didn't respond." "No." "Why not?" Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Because I don't owe you a response, David. You don't get to blow up my life and then expect me to make you feel better about it. I'm not trying to make myself feel better. I'm trying to apologize. I made a huge mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." Here it was. The moment she'd imagined 1,000 times since he'd left. David admitting he was wrong, asking for forgiveness, wanting her back. A month ago, this might have been enough. She might have been tempted to take him back, to try to rebuild what they'd had. But now? Now she felt nothing but a distant sadness for what they'd lost and what they'd never really had to begin with. "You're right," she said calmly. "You did make a huge mistake. And now you have to live with it. Margaret, please." He reached across the table like he wanted to take her hand, but she pulled back. "These past weeks without you have been hell. I can't sleep. I can't focus. All I think about is what I had and what I threw away." "And Vanessa?" Margaret asked. "What about your great love? The woman who made you feel young and excited?" David looked down at his coffee. "That's over. It ended 2 weeks ago." Margaret raised her eyebrows. "Really? What happened to sometimes love just happens?" He looked up sharply. "She contacted you?" "She sent me a text. Explaining how she and I were helpless victims of your overwhelming feelings for each other." David closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry. She shouldn't have done that." "No, she shouldn't have. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that you destroyed our marriage for something that lasted less than 2 months after you left me." "It wasn't about her," David said desperately. "I mean, it was, but it wasn't. I was having a crisis. I felt old and trapped and like my life was over. She represented something new, something exciting. But I realize now that what we had, what you and I built together, that was real. That was valuable. And I was an idiot to throw it away." Margaret took a sip of her coffee, taking her time to respond. "You're right about one thing. You were an idiot. But David, even if I wanted to, we can't go back. You can't unring this bell. You can't take back what you said or what you did. I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust. But people make mistakes, Margaret. Can't we at least try to work through this? 25 years has to count for something." "It does count for something," Margaret said softly. "It counts as 25 years that I gave to you, to our marriage, to our family. 25 years that I can't get back. And you know what I learned these past weeks? I learned that I don't need you to be happy. I learned that I'm actually okay on my own. Better than okay." "Margaret." "No, David. Let me finish." She leaned forward, holding his gaze. "You wanted someone younger because you thought it would make you feel alive again. You thought excitement and newness would fill whatever hole you felt inside. But that hole? That's not something another person can fill. That's something you have to fix yourself." "I know that now," he said quietly. "Do you? Or do you just know that the grass wasn't greener? That Vanessa came with her own complications and expectations? That running away from your problems didn't actually solve them?" David didn't answer, which was answer enough. Margaret stood up, gathering her purse. "I hope you figure out what you're really looking for, David. I hope you find a way to be happy with yourself. But I can't be part of that journey anymore. I have my own path to walk now. So that's it? He asked, and his voice broke. 25 years, and you're just done? You were done first, Margaret reminded him gently. You ended this the moment you betrayed me. I'm just accepting reality and moving forward. She started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and David? Next time you have a midlife crisis, try therapy instead of infidelity. It's a lot less destructive. She left him sitting there and walked out into the bright morning sunshine feeling lighter than she had in months. The encounter had been exactly what she needed. Not for closure, but for confirmation. Confirmation that she'd made the right choice. That moving forward without David was the healthiest thing she could do. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. A text from Laura. How are you doing today? Margaret smiled and typed back. I'm good. Actually good. And she realized, with a sense of wonder, that it was true. The weeks leading up to the finalization of the divorce were both the hardest and the most liberating of Margaret's life. She continued building her new routine, her new identity. She took a part-time job at a local art gallery, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. The owner, a vibrant woman in her 60s named Patricia, took one look at Margaret's paintings and hired her on the spot. You have real talent, Patricia said, studying Margaret's work. These pieces have depth. Pain, yes, but also hope. That's powerful. Working at the gallery introduced Margaret to a whole new world. Artists and collectors, people who talked about creativity and expression and living authentically. She found herself staying late after her shifts, talking with Patricia about art and life and everything in between. Patricia had been divorced twice and had no sympathy for David. Men who leave their wives for younger women are clichés, she said matter-of-factly one evening as they closed up the gallery. They're boring and predictable. You, on the other hand, are interesting. You're transforming. That's much more compelling than some middle-aged man trying to recapture his youth. Margaret started attending art classes in the evenings, rediscovering skills she'd let atrophy for decades. She painted and sculpted and let herself be bad at things, let herself make mistakes and learn and grow. It was freeing in a way she hadn't expected. She also started making new friends outside her old married couple social circle. Women she met at the gym or the gallery or through Laura. Women who were single or divorced or widowed, all navigating life on their own terms. They went out for dinners and drinks, to movies and museums. Margaret discovered she actually enjoyed her own company, enjoyed being independent. One evening, about 3 months after David had moved out, Margaret was at a gallery opening when a man approached her. He was around her age, distinguished looking with silver hair and kind eyes. You're Margaret Shen, aren't you? He said. I saw your painting in the window. The one with the phoenix rising. It's remarkable. Thank you, Margaret said, feeling herself blush. I'm still learning, really. Aren't we all? He extended his hand. I'm Robert Lin. I teach art history at the university. They talked for over an hour, about art and life and everything in between. Robert was recently widowed, his wife having passed away 2 years ago after a long illness. He spoke about her with such love and respect that Margaret found herself tearing up. That's how it should be, she said. Love that honors and respects. Love that lasts even after death. Robert nodded. I was lucky to have 40 years with her. And now I'm learning to build a new life while honoring the old one. It's not easy, but it's worth it. As the evening ended, Robert asked if he could take her to coffee sometime. Margaret surprised herself by saying yes. It wasn't a date, exactly. More like two people who'd survived loss finding comfort in shared understanding. But it felt like a beginning of something, even if she wasn't sure what yet. Finally, the day of the divorce finalization arrived. Margaret dressed carefully in one of her new outfits, a navy blue suit that made her feel professional and powerful. Emma had flown in from Boston to be there, and Laura took the day off work. They flanked her as she walked into the courthouse, her armor, and her support system all in one. David was already there with his lawyer, standing in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked even worse than he had at the coffee shop. His suit hung loose on him, like he'd lost weight. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. When he saw Margaret, something flickered across his face. Regret. Longing. Too late. Margaret, he started, moving toward her, but Jennifer stepped between them. Mr. Chen, all communication goes through me, remember? She was all business, her voice crisp and professional. I just want to talk to my wife for a minute, David said. Soon-to-be ex-wife, Jennifer corrected. And no. We're here to finalize the settlement you agreed to. That's all. They were called into the courtroom shortly after. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the settlement terms with practiced efficiency. Division of assets. Spousal support. Custody arrangements for their adult children. That part made Margaret want to laugh bitterly. Their children were grown, but they still had to address it formally. The whole thing took less than 30 minutes. 3 decades of marriage, reduced to signatures on documents and a judge's stamp of approval. When it was done, when the judge declared them officially divorced, Margaret expected to feel something dramatic. Relief or sadness or anger. Instead, she just felt tired. And strangely at peace. Outside the courthouse, David tried one more time. He caught up with Margaret as she walked to the parking lot, Emma and Laura hanging back to give them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Margaret, please. Just hear me out. David's voice was desperate. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we could try again. We could go to counseling, work through this. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Margaret turned to face him fully. David, do you know what the hardest part of all this has been? It wasn't the betrayal, as horrible as that was. It wasn't even the humiliation of knowing you left me for someone half your age. The hardest part was realizing that the man I thought I knew, the man I built a life with, never really existed. Or maybe he did, and somewhere along the way, he became someone I don't recognize. That's not fair, David protested. People change. Marriages evolve. I made a mistake, but that doesn't erase everything we were to each other. You're right. It doesn't erase it. But it does change it. It changes everything. Margaret's voice was firm but not unkind. You said you wanted someone younger, David. Someone who made you feel alive. Well, I want something too. I want someone who sees me. Who values me. Who doesn't make me question my worth because I've aged or changed or am not shiny and new anymore. I see you now, David said. I value you. I always did. No, you didn't. If you had, you never would have done what you did. Margaret took a deep breath. I spent 25 years putting you first. Your career, your needs, your happiness. And I was okay with that because I thought we were partners. But we weren't partners, David. I was your support system, and you were the star of the show. And the moment I stopped being useful in the way you wanted, you went looking for someone else. That's not true. It is true. And the worst part? I let it happen. I let myself become so small, so focused on your life, that I forgot I had my own. But not anymore. These past few months, I've remembered who I am. I've discovered who I can be. And that woman? She doesn't need you. David's face crumpled. So there's no chance? No possibility that we could ever? No, Margaret said gently but firmly. There's no chance. You made your choice, and I've made mine. I'm choosing myself. She walked away then, leaving him standing in the parking lot. Emma and Laura rushed to her side, both of them looking fierce and proud. That was perfect, Laura said. Absolutely perfect. How do you feel? Emma asked, searching her mother's face. Margaret considered the question. Free, she said finally. I feel free. They went out for lunch after, a celebration of sorts. Margaret's divorce finalization day lunch, Laura called it, raising her glass of wine. To new beginnings and to knowing your worth. They clinked glasses, and Margaret felt surrounded by love. Not romantic love, but something equally important. The love of true friends and family who showed up when it mattered. As they ate and talked and laughed, Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Robert, the art professor she'd met at the gallery. I hope your day went well. I'd still love to take you for that coffee if the offer stands. No pressure, just company if you'd like it. Margaret smiled and typed back. Coffee sounds perfect. Tomorrow afternoon? His response came quickly. It's a date. Well, not a date. Just a friendly coffee date. I'll stop talking now before I make this more awkward. Margaret laughed and showed the text to Emma and Laura. They both squealed with delight. Who is this? Emma demanded. Mom, do you have a suitor? He's not a suitor, Margaret protested, but she was smiling. He's just a nice man I met at the gallery. A friend. A friend who wants to take you on a not date, Laura teased. That's how it starts. Margaret shook her head, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement in her chest. She wasn't ready for a relationship, not really. But the possibility of connection, of companionship with someone who saw her as an equal? That was appealing. The next afternoon, Margaret met Robert at a cozy coffee shop near the university. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a nervous smile. I didn't know what you liked, so I got you a latte. But I can get you something else if you prefer, he said, standing as she approached. A latte is perfect, Margaret assured him, sitting down. They talked for hours. About art and teaching and life after loss. Robert was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in what she had to say. He asked about her paintings, about her children, about her dreams for the future. And when she asked about him, he answered with the same openness, sharing stories about his late wife, his work, his own journey through grief. It's strange, isn't it? He said at one point. Learning to be yourself again after defining yourself through another person for so long. Margaret nodded. That's exactly it. I was David's wife for so long that I forgot how to just be Margaret. I'm still figuring out who that is. Well, from what I can see, Margaret is pretty remarkable, Robert said, and there was no flirtation in his voice, just sincerity. When they finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting. Robert walked her to her car, and they stood there for a moment in the twilight. I'd like to do this again, he said. If you would. I'd like that too, Margaret replied. They didn't hug or kiss or even shake hands. They just smiled at each other with the understanding that sometimes, the best connections start slow and build naturally. As Margaret drove home, she thought about how far she'd come in just a few months. From the devastated woman David had left behind to someone who was genuinely excited about her future. Someone who had hobbies and friends and interests outside of being someone's wife. Someone who could imagine, maybe someday, opening her heart again. The house on Maple Street no longer felt empty when she walked through the door. It felt like home. Her home. She'd redecorated, moving furniture and painting walls and making the space truly hers. The roses she'd planted all those years ago were blooming again, vibrant and alive. Margaret poured herself a glass of wine and went out to the back porch, settling into her favorite chair. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. In the distance, she could hear children playing, someone mowing their lawn, the normal sounds of suburban life. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. I'll regret it forever. Margaret read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. His regret was no longer her concern. She'd spent too many years managing his emotions, soothing his fears, making sure he was happy. Not anymore. Another text came in, this one from Michael. Just checking in, Mom. How are you doing? She smiled and typed back. I'm good. Sweetheart. Really good. Tell me about your week. As she chatted with her son, updating him on her job at the gallery and her upcoming art class, Margaret felt a profound sense of contentment. Not happiness exactly, that would take more time. But contentment. Peace. The knowledge that she was going to be okay. Better than okay. The transformation wasn't complete. There would still be hard days ahead, moments when she missed what she thought she had, times when loneliness crept in. But Margaret knew now that she was strong enough to handle it. She'd survived the worst and come out the other side. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Margaret raised her wine glass in a silent toast. To endings that are really beginnings. To finding yourself after losing yourself. To second chances and new chapters. And to the courage to choose yourself, even when it's the hardest choice of all. What would you do if you had to rebuild your entire life from scratch? If everything you thought was permanent suddenly disappeared? Margaret was learning that you dig deep, you find strength you didn't know you had, and you discover that sometimes the best version of yourself is the one that emerges from the ashes. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But as Margaret sat on her porch, surrounded by the life she was actively creating rather than just maintaining, she knew one thing for certain. David had wanted someone younger. And in a way, he'd gotten exactly that. Because Margaret Chen, at 51, felt younger than she had in years. Not in body, but in spirit. Young in the way that mattered, hopeful, curious, open to possibility. She'd given David a choice all those months ago when he'd first confessed. Leave and lose her forever, or stay and work on their marriage like adults. He'd chosen to leave. And in doing so, he'd set her free. Now the only choice that mattered was hers. And she was choosing life. Her own life, on her own terms. The future stretched out before her, unknown and slightly terrifying but also thrilling. There would be more coffee dates with Robert, more paintings to create, more friendships to nurture. There would be holidays with her children and quiet evenings alone. There would be challenges and victories and everything in between. But through it all, Margaret would be herself. Fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And that, she was discovering, was more than enough. As the night settled in and the stars grew brighter, Margaret went inside to her studio. She had a new painting in mind, something bold and vibrant and alive. She set up her canvas and picked up her brush, and as she made the first stroke of color across the blank white surface, she smiled. This was just the beginning. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Margaret stood in front of her largest canvas yet, brush in hand, completely absorbed in the act of creation. The painting was unlike anything she'd done before. Bold, vibrant, unapologetic. A woman rising from flames, not consumed by them but transformed, her arms spread wide as if embracing the sky itself. The spare bedroom that had once held boxes of old memories was now her studio, walls covered in her work. Some pieces were dark, reflecting the pain of those early days. Others were lighter, showing her gradual emergence into joy. But this one, this Phoenix woman, was different. This was triumph. Margaret, Patricia's voice called from downstairs. You have visitors. Margaret set down her brush and wiped her hands on her paint-stained jeans. Another thing that had changed, she no longer worried about getting messy, about staying pristine and perfect. She'd learned to embrace the chaos of living fully. When she reached the living room, she found Emma and Michael standing there, both of them grinning like they had a secret. What's going on? Margaret asked, looking between her children. We have news, Emma said, practically bouncing. But first, we need to talk about Dad. Margaret's stomach tightened. She'd been doing so well, thinking about David less and less each day. What about him? Michael stepped forward, his expression serious. He's been calling us. A lot. Asking about you, trying to get information about your life, basically using us as spies. And we told him to stop, Emma added quickly. We made it very clear that if he wants to know anything about your life, He needs to respect your boundaries and leave us out of it. Thank you, Margaret said softly. That must have been difficult. Not really, Michael said with a shrug. He made his choice. He doesn't get to control the narrative now or keep tabs on you through us. But that's not the main news, Emma interrupted, her excitement bubbling over again. Mom, you know how you submitted your Phoenix painting to that gallery competition Patricia told you about? Margaret nodded slowly. She'd almost forgotten about it. Patricia had encouraged her to enter, but Margaret hadn't thought much would come of it. You won, Emma practically shouted. You won first place. They called the gallery this morning, and Patricia called us because she couldn't reach you. You were probably painting and had your phone on silent again. Margaret stared at her daughter, the words not quite processing. I won. You won. Michael pulled out his phone and showed her the competition website. There was her painting, front and center, with a description that made her eyes water. Margaret Chen's Phoenix Rising captures the raw essence of transformation and resilience. Her use of color and emotion speaks to anyone who has survived hardship and emerged stronger. A stunning debut from an artist we'll be watching closely. The prize includes a cash award and a solo exhibition at the downtown gallery, Emma added. Mom, this is huge. This is your art career actually happening. Margaret sank down onto the couch, overwhelmed. A solo exhibition. Her work displayed in one of the city's most prestigious galleries. It felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. I can't believe it, she whispered. We can, Michael said, sitting beside her. We've seen your work, Mom. We've watched you pour your heart into every piece. You deserve this. Emma sat on her other side, taking her hand. You deserve all the good things that are coming your way. And there's more. The gallery owner wants to meet with you next week to discuss the exhibition. They're talking about a spring show, which gives you time to create more pieces. Margaret felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but these were different from the tears she'd cried 6 months ago. These were tears of joy, of accomplishment, of realizing that she'd taken the devastation of her divorce and transformed it into something beautiful. Your father's going to hear about this, Michael said quietly. The competition results are all over the art community websites. It's getting a lot of attention. Good, Margaret said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. Let him see what I've become. Let him see what I was capable of all along. That's our mom, Emma said with pride, squeezing her hand. They spent the rest of the morning celebrating, ordering Margaret's favorite brunch and going through all the details of the competition. Margaret kept pulling up the website on her phone, reading the description of her painting over and over, trying to make it feel real. Around noon, her phone rang. Robert. They'd been seeing each other regularly for coffee and gallery visits, their friendship slowly deepening into something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. I saw the news, he said when she answered, his voice warm with genuine happiness. Margaret, congratulations. This is incredible. Thank you, she said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. I still can't quite believe it. Believe it. You're talented, and people are recognizing that. Are you free tomorrow? I'd love to take you to dinner to celebrate properly. And before you say it's not necessary, I want to. Please let me. Margaret glanced at Emma and Michael, who were both watching her with knowing smiles. Okay, she said. Dinner sounds lovely. After she hung up, Emma immediately pounced. Okay, so Robert is definitely more than just a friend, right? We're taking things slow, Margaret protested, but she could feel herself blushing. Mom, you're allowed to move on, Michael said gently. You're allowed to be happy with someone new. I know. It's just strange sometimes. 25 years with one person, and now everything is different. Different isn't bad, Emma pointed out. Different can be amazing. As the afternoon wore on and her children finally left, Margaret sat in her studio, looking at her paintings with new eyes. These weren't just therapy anymore, weren't just a way to process pain. They were her voice, her story, her contribution to the world. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Congratulations on your award. I always knew you were talented. I'm sorry I never encouraged you to pursue it. David. Margaret stared at the message for a long moment. 6 months ago, these words might have meant something. They might have made her angry or sad or given her some bitter satisfaction. Now they just felt empty. Too little, too late, and most importantly, no longer relevant to her life. She deleted the message without responding and blocked the number. Then she turned back to her canvas and lost herself in color and creation. The next evening, Robert picked her up for dinner. He'd chosen a small Italian restaurant with candlelight and soft music, intimate without being overtly romantic. As they settled into their table, Margaret felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. Tell me everything about the competition, Robert said after they'd ordered. I want to hear it all. So Margaret told him. About submitting the painting on Patricia's encouragement, about not expecting anything to come of it, about the shock and joy of winning. Robert listened intently, asking questions, genuinely interested in every detail. You know what I love about your work? He said when she'd finished. It's honest. You don't hide your pain or try to pretty it up. You show the whole journey, the breaking and the healing. That takes courage. I didn't feel courageous, Margaret admitted. I just felt like I had to get it out somehow. The painting was survival. That's what makes it powerful, Robert said. Real art comes from real emotion. You've lived through something devastating, and instead of letting it destroy you, you transformed it into beauty. That's alchemy. Their food arrived, and as they ate, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about art and music and books, about their children and their hopes for the future. Robert made her laugh with stories from his classroom, and Margaret found herself sharing memories from her own life, the good ones she'd almost forgotten in the shadow of the divorce. As dessert arrived, tiramisu they'd agreed to share, Robert's expression grew more serious. Margaret, I need to tell you something. I value our friendship immensely. These past months, getting to know you, have been some of the best I've had since and past. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want more. Margaret's heart started racing. She'd known this was coming, had felt the shift between them, but hearing it out loud made it real. I understand if you're not ready, Robert continued. I know you're still healing. But I wanted to be honest about my feelings. I'm drawn to you, your strength, your creativity, the way you've rebuilt yourself. I'd like to explore what this could be between us, if you're open to it. Margaret set down her fork, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Robert, I care about you. More than I expected to, honestly. But I'm scared. The last relationship I had, I lost myself in it. I became so focused on being what David needed that I forgot who I was. I understand that, Robert said gently. And I would never ask you to lose yourself for me. What I'm offering isn't a repeat of what you had before. It's a partnership of equals. Two whole people choosing to share their lives, not one person sacrificing for the other. How do you know it won't become that? Margaret asked. How do you know I won't fall back into old patterns? Because you're not the same person who entered that marriage at 23, Robert said. You've been through fire and come out stronger. You know your worth now. And I've lived through loss. I know how precious and fragile life is. I would never take you for granted the way he did. Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes. I'm not ready to rush into anything. I need time. Then we take time, Robert said simply. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people enjoying each other's company and seeing where it leads. I'm not going anywhere, Margaret. She reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being honest, he replied, squeezing her hand gently. The rest of the evening was lighter, the weight of the conversation lifting. When Robert walked her to her door, he didn't try to kiss her. He just smiled and said he'd call her tomorrow, and Margaret felt grateful for his patience, for his respect of her boundaries. Inside, she leaned against the door and smiled. This was what healthy looked like. This was what it felt like to be valued and respected. And while she wasn't ready to dive headfirst into a new relationship, she was open to the possibility. That alone felt like progress. The weeks leading up to her gallery exhibition were a whirlwind. Margaret painted like she was possessed, creating piece after piece that charted her emotional journey. She worked with the gallery curator to select which paintings to display, to write descriptions, to plan the layout of the exhibition. Patricia was thrilled, acting as both mentor and cheerleader. "This is your moment," she kept saying. "Your chance to show the world who Margaret Chen really is." The invitation list for the opening night was extensive. Friends, family, local art critics, collectors. Margaret sent invitations to everyone important in her new life, Laura, of course, and Emma and Michael, Robert, her art class friends, people from the gym. She even invited some of the couples she and David had been friends with, curious to see who would show up. She did not invite David. But 3 days before the opening, he showed up at her house. Margaret was in her studio, putting finishing touches on her final piece, when the doorbell rang. When she opened it and saw him standing there, her first instinct was to close the door in his face. "Please," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Margaret considered refusing. She had every right to. But curiosity won out. What more could he possibly have to say? 5 minutes, she said, not inviting him in. They stood on the porch, the physical barrier of the threshold between them. "I heard about your exhibition," David began. "I wanted to congratulate you in person. You could have called. You blocked my number." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Margaret, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I'd like to come to your opening." "No." The word was simple, final. David's face fell. "Margaret, please." "No," she repeated. "This is my moment, David. My achievement. My new life. You don't get to be part of it just because you've decided you made a mistake." "I know I hurt you," David said, his voice breaking. "I know I destroyed what we had. But doesn't 25 years earn me at least the chance to support you in this?" 25 years earned you a lot of things," Margaret said coldly. "My loyalty, my trust, my devotion. And you threw all of that away. You don't get to cherry-pick which parts of my life you want to be involved in now." "I'm proud of you," David insisted. "I always knew you were talented. I should have encouraged you more." "You're right. You should have. But you were too busy focusing on your own career, your own needs, your own desires. And then when you got bored with our life, you decided the problem was me instead of recognizing it was you all along." David flinched. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Vanessa, the divorce, all of it. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too stupid and selfish to see what I had. And now you want me to feel sorry for you?" Margaret asked. "You want me to absolve you of your guilt?" "I won't do that, David. Your regret is something you have to live with. It's not my job to make you feel better about your choices. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I just want another chance." There was the truth, finally out in the open. Margaret looked at the man she'd spent 25 years with, the man whose life she'd organized around, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no hate. Just a distant sadness for what could have been if he'd been capable of truly valuing her. "Do you know what I've learned these past months?" Margaret asked. "I've learned that I'm capable of so much more than I ever imagined. I've learned that I don't need a man to validate my worth. I've learned that starting over at 51 isn't ending, it's beginning. And I've learned that the worst thing that ever happened to me, you leaving, was actually the best thing, because it forced me to find myself again." "Margaret. I gave you a choice once, David. Do you remember? After you told me about Vanessa, after you asked for a divorce, I could have fought dirty. I could have made your life hell. But I gave you a choice: walk away cleanly and let me keep my dignity, or drag this out and watch me fight for every single thing I deserved. You chose to walk away. And now I'm giving you another choice. David looked at her hopefully, desperately. Stay away from my exhibition. Stay away from my new life. Let me move forward without the weight of your regret dragging me down. Or come to the opening and watch everyone see exactly what you lost, exactly what you took for granted, exactly what you'll never have again. Those are your options. Choose wisely this time. If I come, will you talk to me? David asked. Will you consider giving us another try? No, Margaret said simply. If you come, it will be as a spectator to a life you're no longer part of. You'll watch me celebrate with people who actually value me. You'll see me happy without you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll finally understand what you threw away. She stepped back into her house. Your 5 minutes are up. Goodbye, David. She closed the door and locked it, listening to his footsteps retreat down the porch steps. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness. From adrenaline. From the power of standing her ground and refusing to let him back in. Laura called that evening. I heard David showed up at your house. News travels fast, Margaret said with a laugh. Small art community, Laura replied. Patricia told me. How are you doing? I'm good. Actually good. I told him he wasn't welcome at the exhibition. Good for you. What did he say? That he wanted another chance. That he was proud of me. All the things he should have said when we were married but didn't. Too little, too late, Laura said firmly. You're better off without him, Marg. You know that, right? I do, Margaret said. And that's the wildest part. I really do know it now. It's not just something I'm telling myself to feel better. It's the truth. The night of the exhibition opening arrived. Margaret dressed carefully in a deep emerald dress that Emma had helped her pick out, elegant and sophisticated. She styled her hair, applied makeup with a careful hand, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was barely recognizable from the one who'd sat crying on the hallway floor 6 months ago. This woman was confident, poised, ready to claim her space in the world. Emma and Michael arrived early to help her set up, both of them dressed to impress and bursting with pride. The gallery looked stunning, her paintings displayed on stark white walls with perfect lighting that made each piece glow. Mom, this is incredible, Michael breathed, walking slowly through the exhibition. These pieces tell a whole story. That's the idea, Margaret said. From devastation to transformation. The full journey. People started arriving. Friends who'd supported her through the divorce. Patricia and the other gallery staff. Robert, who brought her a single perfect rose and kissed her cheek with a warmth that made her blush. Laura with her husband. Couples from Margaret's old life, some looking uncomfortable, others genuinely happy for her. The gallery filled up quickly. A local art critic spent a long time in front of her Phoenix painting, taking notes. A collector asked about purchasing several pieces. People congratulated her, asked about her inspiration, wanted to know her story. Margaret moved through the crowd, accepting compliments and answering questions, feeling like she was floating. This was her work, her heart, displayed for everyone to see. And they weren't just seeing it, they were connecting with it, responding to it, feeling it. She was in the middle of talking to the critic when she saw him. David, standing in the doorway, looking uncertain and out of place. Their eyes met across the room. Margaret felt Emma tense beside her, ready to intervene, but Margaret touched her daughter's arm gently. It's okay. David made his way through the crowd slowly, stopping to look at each painting. Margaret watched him, saw the emotions playing across his face as he took in her work. The pain pieces, the anger pieces, the healing pieces, the joy pieces. Her entire journey, laid bare in color and form. When he finally reached her, he looked shaken. Margaret, these are extraordinary. I had no idea you felt all of this. Of course you didn't, Margaret said calmly. You were too busy thinking about yourself to notice what I was feeling. David flinched but didn't argue. He gestured to the phoenix painting, the one that had won the competition. This one especially. It's powerful. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the noise of the party continuing around them. Finally, David spoke. I see why you didn't want me here. Seeing all of this, seeing what you'd become without me, it's like looking at everything I lost. You didn't lose anything, Margaret corrected. You threw it away. There's a difference. I know that now. David's voice was heavy with regret. For what it's worth, I am genuinely proud of you. And I am genuinely sorry for everything I put you through. I appreciate that, Margaret said. And I hope you find what you're looking for, David. I hope you figure out how to be happy with yourself. But that's not my concern anymore. My concern is my own life, my own happiness, my own future. Are you happy? He asked quietly. Is this new life everything you hoped it would be? Margaret looked around the gallery. At her children, beaming with pride. At Laura, raising her glass in a toast. At Robert, watching her from across the room with warm, patient eyes. At her paintings, her soul made visible. At the life she'd built from the ruins of her marriage. Yes, she said simply. I am happy. Happier than I've been in years. Maybe happier than I've ever been, because this happiness is mine. I built it. I earned it. And no one can take it away from me. David nodded slowly, his eyes wet. Then I'm glad. I'm glad you found what you needed, even if it meant losing me. I didn't lose you, Margaret said gently. You lost me. Don't ever forget that. She walked away then, leaving him standing alone in the middle of her triumph. Emma immediately appeared at her side, linking their arms together. That was amazing, her daughter whispered. You handled that perfectly. I've had practice, Margaret said with a small smile. The rest of the evening was magical. Multiple pieces sold, including the phoenix painting to a private collector who promised it would be displayed in her corporate office for hundreds of people to see every day. The critic wrote down Margaret's contact information, talking about a feature article. People asked when her next exhibition would be. As the crowd finally started to thin out, Robert approached with 2 glasses of champagne. To Margaret Shin, artist and phoenix, he said with a smile. To new beginnings, Margaret replied, clinking her glass against his. They stood together, looking at her paintings, and Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but hers. Fully, completely, beautifully hers. David had left shortly after their conversation, but Margaret barely noticed. He was a footnote now, a chapter that had ended. The story continuing without him was so much richer, so much more vibrant than anything they'd had together. As the last guests filtered out and the gallery staff began cleaning up, Patricia pulled Margaret aside. You know what the most beautiful thing about tonight was? She asked. What? Watching you own your power. Watching you stand in the middle of your success and not apologize for it, not diminish it, not give anyone else credit for it. This was all you, Margaret. All you. Margaret felt tears building. Thank you. For believing in me, for pushing me, for giving me this opportunity. I didn't give you anything you didn't earn, Patricia said firmly. Your talent did this. Your courage did this. I just provided the space. After the gallery closed, Robert walked Margaret to her car. The night air was crisp and cool, full of possibility. How are you feeling? He asked. Exhausted. Exhilarated. Grateful. Margaret leaned against her car. Tonight was everything I didn't know I needed. You were magnificent, Robert said. Watching you in your element, confident and gracious and so incredibly talented, it was a privilege. Margaret looked up at him. Robert, about what you said at dinner. About wanting more. Yes? I think I'm ready. Not for anything rushed or forced, but for something real. Something honest. Something equal. Robert's face lit up. Yeah? Yeah, Margaret said, smiling. I can't promise it will be easy. I'm still figuring out who I am. But I'd like to figure it out with you, if you're willing to be patient with me. I can be very patient, Robert said softly. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture gentle and full of promise. They didn't kiss, not yet. But they held hands in the parking lot under the stars, and it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. As Margaret drove home that night, she thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain of David's betrayal. The long, difficult months of learning to stand on her own. The small victories that had built into something bigger. The courage to create, to be vulnerable, to show the world her heart. She thought about the choice she'd given David, both times. Walk away cleanly or watch her thrive without him. He'd chosen to walk away the first time, and tonight, he'd chosen to watch. And in watching, he'd finally understood what he'd lost. But more importantly, Margaret had understood what she'd gained. The house on Maple Street was lit up when she pulled into the driveway. Emma and Michael's cars were there, they'd beaten her home and were waiting to continue the celebration. When she walked in, they had music playing and more champagne and enormous smiles. To Mom, Emma said, raising her glass. The most talented, courageous, amazing woman we know. To Mom, Michael echoed. Who taught us that it's never too late to start over, to chase your dreams, to choose yourself? They drank and danced and laughed until late into the night. At one point, Emma pulled up the gallery's website, showing Margaret the dozens of positive comments already appearing under photos of her exhibition. Listen to this one, Emma said. Margaret Chen's work speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Her journey from heartbreak to healing is evident in every brushstroke. This is art that matters. Margaret felt her eyes welling up again. Had she cried this much in one day? But these were happy tears, tears of accomplishment and joy and relief. Eventually, her children headed up to their old rooms, planning to stay the night. Margaret walked through the house, looking at it with new appreciation. Every room held memories of her old life, yes, but they also held the potential for new ones. This house had witnessed her breaking. Now it would witness her blooming. In her studio, she stood in front of a blank canvas. Her next painting was already forming in her mind. Not pain this time, or even healing. This one would be pure joy. The celebration of a woman who'd found herself again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert. Thank you for tonight. For your honesty, for your art, for being you. Sweet dreams, Margaret. She smiled and typed back. Thank you for seeing me. For all of me. Sweet dreams. As she got ready for bed, Margaret caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked the same as she had that morning, but somehow different. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A confidence in the set of her shoulders. She thought about David, probably at home right now, wrestling with his regrets. She thought about Vanessa, whoever she was, whatever had become of her. She thought about the 25 years she devoted to a marriage that had ended in betrayal. And she forgave them. Not because they deserved it, but because she deserved the peace that forgiveness brought. She released the anger, the bitterness, the pain. She let it all go like ashes on the wind. In bed, in the darkness, Margaret whispered to herself, I choose me. I choose my happiness, my dreams, my future. I choose myself, today and every day. It was a promise. A vow more important than any wedding vows she'd spoken 26 years ago. Because this vow was to herself, and she intended to keep it. Sleep came easily, dreamless and deep. Margaret woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She could hear Emma and Michael talking, their voices mixing with laughter. She stretched, feeling pleasantly sore from standing all evening at the gallery. Today, she'd start her next painting. She'd call Robert and make plans for the weekend. She'd look into teaching opportunities. Several people had asked last night if she offered classes. The future stretched out before her, full of possibility and promise. Not despite what had happened, but in many ways, because of it. David's betrayal had broken her, yes. But in breaking, she'd been able to rebuild herself into something stronger, something truer. As Margaret went downstairs to join her children, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the pain that had taught her resilience. For the loneliness that had taught her self-reliance. For the ending that had given her a new beginning. David had wanted someone younger. And in the most unexpected way, he'd given Margaret exactly what she needed. The chance to shed the old version of herself and emerge as someone new. Someone younger in spirit, fresher in perspective, more alive than she'd been in decades. The choice she'd given him, walk away cleanly or watch her thrive, had been less about him and more about her. It had been her declaration that his opinion, his regret, his presence no longer held power over her life. And in making that choice, in setting that boundary, Margaret had claimed her freedom. The story could have ended in bitterness and defeat. Instead, it ended in art galleries and new love and children proud of their mother's courage. It ended in paintings that spoke to others going through their own darkness. It ended in a woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less than she deserved. Emma handed her a cup of coffee as she entered the kitchen. "Morning, superstar." "Morning, sweetheart," Margaret replied, accepting the coffee and the kiss on her cheek. "We were just talking about next steps," Michael said. "You need a website, Mom. A professional one to showcase your work. And a social media presence," Emma added. "You should be sharing your story. Think how many women could benefit from hearing how you rebuilt your life." Margaret considered it. She'd always been private, always kept her struggles to herself. But maybe Emma was right. Maybe sharing her journey could help others who were going through similar pain. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it. Let's share the story." Over breakfast, they planned a website featuring her art and her story. Social media posts documenting her continued journey. Maybe even a blog where she could write about creativity and healing and finding yourself after loss. "The pulse stories," Emma suggested. "Your journey has a pulse, a rhythm. From devastation to creation, from ending to beginning." Margaret smiled. "I like that." As her children continued brainstorming, Margaret's phone rang. "Patricia." "Margaret, darling, have you seen the news?" "What news?" "The Art Critics review just went live. It's glowing. Absolutely glowing. And she's already getting calls from other galleries wanting to feature your work." Margaret felt her heart start to race. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Patricia's voice was warm with pride. "Margaret, this is just the beginning for you. You're about to become one of the most talked about artists in the city." After she hung up, Margaret shared the news with Emma and Michael. They screamed and hugged her, all of them jumping around the kitchen like children. "This is incredible," Emma kept saying. "Mom, you're going to be famous." "I don't know about famous," Margaret said, but she was grinning too wide to contain. "But I am going to be successful on my own terms. And that feels amazing." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews with art magazines. Offers from galleries. Commissions from collectors. Margaret hired an agent to help manage it all, a sharp woman named Diane who'd been in the business for 30 years and knew exactly how to navigate the art world. Through it all, Margaret kept painting. She kept creating, kept pouring her heart onto canvas. Each piece told a story, her story, but also a universal story of survival and transformation. She and Robert's relationship deepened slowly, naturally. They went on real dates now, acknowledged that what they had was becoming something serious. But it was different from her marriage to David. Robert encouraged her independence, celebrated her success, never made her feel like she had to choose between her art and their relationship. One evening, about 8 months after the divorce, Robert took Margaret to the spot where he'd first met Anne, his late wife. It was a quiet park overlooking the river, peaceful and beautiful. "I wanted you to see this place," he said as they sat on a bench watching the sunset. And then I used to come here all the time. It was our spot. Margaret took his hand, honored that he'd share this with her. She must have been an amazing woman. She was, Robert said. And I loved her with everything I had. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And Margaret, you've taught me that it's okay to love again. That honoring the past doesn't mean refusing the future. I'm scared sometimes, Margaret admitted. Scared of losing myself again. Scared of making the same mistakes. We won't make the same mistakes, Robert said firmly. Because we're not the same people who made them. We've both been through too much, learned too much. What we're building isn't a repeat of our past relationships. It's something entirely new. He was right. What they had was new. Built on mutual respect and honest communication, and two people who'd learned the hard way what really mattered in a partnership. As the sun set over the river, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Robert turned to Margaret. I love you, he said. I know it's fast, and I know you might not be ready to say it back, but I needed you to know. Margaret looked at him, at this kind, patient man who saw her for exactly who she was and loved her anyway. Who celebrated her success and supported her dreams and never asked her to be anything other than herself. I love you too, she said. And it's terrifying and wonderful and exactly what I didn't know I needed. They kissed then, soft and sweet, the promise of something beautiful ahead of them. Life settled into a new normal. Margaret split her time between creating art, managing her growing career, spending time with Robert, and staying connected with Emma and Michael. She was busy in the best possible way, filled with purpose and passion. David faded into the background of her life. She heard through mutual friends that he was struggling. The relationship with Vanessa had ended badly, apparently. He was alone, dealing with the consequences of his choices. Margaret felt a distant sympathy but nothing more. His life was no longer her concern. 1 year after David had asked her for a divorce, Margaret held her second solo exhibition. This one was bigger, in a more prestigious gallery, featuring work that showed her continued evolution as an artist. The night of the opening, surrounded by friends and admirers and collectors, Margaret stood in front of her latest piece. It was titled Rebirth, and it showed a woman emerging from water, cleansed and renewed, reaching toward the light. Beautiful, isn't it? Robert said, coming up beside her. It's my journey, Margaret said. From drowning to swimming to flying. You've come so far. We've come so far, Margaret corrected, taking his hand. Looking back, she could see how every painful moment had been necessary. How David's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had actually set her free. Free to discover who she really was. Free to pursue her dreams. Free to find love that honored rather than diminished her. If someone had told her a year ago that she'd be standing here, successful artist, confidently single or happily coupled depending on the day, thriving in ways she'd never imagined, she wouldn't have believed them. The pain had been too fresh, the future too uncertain, the wound too raw. But here she was. Living proof that endings could be beginnings. That devastation could lead to transformation. That 51 wasn't too old to start over, to discover yourself, to build a life that felt authentic and true. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Margaret found herself alone for a moment in the gallery. She walked slowly past her paintings, seeing them with fresh eyes. Each one a marker on her journey. Each one proof that she'd survived, that she'd thrived, that she'd become exactly who she was meant to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma, so proud of you, Mom. You're an inspiration. Another from Michael, that's my mom. Killing it. And one from Laura, remember when you thought your life was over? Look at you now. Just look at you. Margaret smiled, her heart full. She did remember. She remembered sitting on that hallway floor, broken and lost. She remembered thinking she'd never feel whole again. She remembered believing that David leaving meant she'd failed somehow. How wrong she'd been. David hadn't left because she wasn't enough. He'd left because he was broken inside, chasing something external to fix something internal. His leaving had nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with his inability to recognize it. And in leaving, he'd given her the greatest gift, even if he hadn't meant to. He'd given her herself back. Robert appeared with her coat. Ready to go home? Almost, Margaret said. There's one more thing I want to do. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. For months, she'd been thinking about writing something, not for publication or public consumption, but for herself. A letter to the woman she'd been a year ago. A letter of hope and encouragement. She began typing. Dear Margaret. Right now, you're sitting on your hallway floor, crying because the man you loved for 25 years just walked out the door. You think your life is over. You think you'll never be happy again. You think you've wasted a quarter century on someone who didn't value you. I'm writing to tell you that you're wrong. Your life isn't over. It's just beginning. The next year will be the hardest and the best of your life. You'll cry more tears than you knew you had. You'll question everything about yourself. You'll wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But you will. I promise you, you will. You're going to discover that you're an artist. A real one, with talent and vision and something important to say. You're going to create paintings that move people, that help them process their own pain. You're going to have exhibitions and sell pieces and be interviewed about your work. You're going to make new friends and reconnect with old ones. You're going to laugh again, really laugh, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. You're going to dance in your kitchen and sing in your car and feel joy in the simple act of being alive. You're going to meet someone new. Someone kind and patient and good. Someone who sees your worth and never asks you to diminish yourself. Someone who makes you feel cherished without making you feel owned. And you're going to realize that love doesn't have to hurt, that partnership doesn't require sacrifice of self. Most importantly, you're going to fall in love with yourself. You're going to look in the mirror and like what you see. Not because you've changed your appearance, though you will do that too. But because you'll finally see yourself clearly. Strong. Resilient. Worthy. Enough. More than enough. The man who left you will regret it. He'll realize too late what he had. But by then, you won't care. His regret won't give you satisfaction because his opinion will no longer matter to you. So when you're ready to get up off that floor, do it. Stand up. Move forward. One step at a time, one day at a time. Choose yourself. Choose your healing. Choose your future. Because that future, it's so much brighter than you can imagine right now. With love and hope, the woman you're becoming. Margaret read it through twice, tears streaming down her face. Then she saved it and looked up at Robert, who was watching her with concern. Happy tears, she assured him. Just writing myself a reminder. Of what? That I'm stronger than I ever knew. They left the gallery hand in hand, stepping out into the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around them, full of life and possibility. Margaret breathed in deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp air of her new life. As Robert drove her home, Margaret looked out the window at the familiar streets. This was still her city, her neighborhood. But everything looked different now. Brighter somehow. More vibrant. Like she was seeing it through new eyes, because in a way, she was. When they pulled up to the house on Maple Street, Margaret sat for a moment, just looking at it. Her house. Her home. The place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Want to come in for a bit? She asked Robert. I'd love to. Inside, they settled on the couch with glasses of wine. The house was quiet, peaceful. Margaret had redecorated extensively over the past year, making it truly hers. Gone were the heavy, traditional pieces David had preferred. In their place was art and color and light. I have something I want to show you, Margaret said, setting down her wine glass. She went to her studio and came back with a canvas, placing it on the coffee table in front of them. It was a painting of two figures, abstract but recognizable. They weren't holding hands or embracing, but standing side by side, each whole and complete on their own, but together creating something beautiful in the space between them. "This is us," Margaret said. "Or at least, how I see us. Two people who've lived full lives, who've loved and lost and survived. Standing together not because we need to, but because we choose to." Robert studied the painting, his expression soft. "It's perfect. We're perfect. Not perfect in the sense of having no flaws, but perfect in the sense of being exactly who we're meant to be." "Exactly," Margaret agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Eventually, Robert spoke. "I've been thinking about something. About the future." Margaret's heart started beating faster. "Okay. I know we said we'd take things slow, and I don't want to rush you or pressure you. But I've been wondering if maybe, someday, you might want to think about living together." Margaret finished. "I've been thinking about it too." "You have?" "I have. Not yet, I'm not ready yet. But someday, maybe. When it feels right." Robert smiled. "That's all I needed to hear. That it's a possibility. That you see a future with me." "I do," Margaret said. "I really do. It terrifies me sometimes, the idea of building a life with someone again. But with you, it feels different. It feels safe. It feels right." "We'll take our time," Robert assured her. "No rush, no pressure. Just two people figuring it out together." They talked late into the night about dreams and possibilities. About traveling together, about collaborating on art projects, about all the adventures still ahead of them. And for the first time since her marriage ended, Margaret felt genuinely excited about sharing her life with someone. As Robert was leaving, he paused at the door. "Thank you," he said. "For trusting me with your heart. I don't take that responsibility lightly." "Thank you," Margaret replied, "for being someone worth trusting." After he left, Margaret walked through her house, turning off lights. In her studio, she paused in front of the blank canvas she'd set up earlier that day. Tomorrow, she'd start a new piece. She already knew what it would be. A triptych showing the 3 stages of her journey. Breaking. Healing. Thriving. It would be her masterwork, she thought. The culmination of everything she'd learned and experienced. A visual representation of what it meant to rise from the ashes. But tonight, she was tired in the best possible way. Tired from a successful exhibition, from meaningful conversations, from living fully. She got ready for bed, sliding under the covers with a contented sigh. Before turning off her bedside lamp, Margaret pulled out her phone one more time. She opened her messages and scrolled back, way back, to that first day after David left. There were texts from Laura and Emma, offering support and love. There were texts from friends who'd heard the news and wanted to check on her. And there, buried among them all, was a text she'd sent to herself that night. Just 2 words, "Keep going." She'd forgotten about that message. But seeing it now, remembering the desperation and despair she'd felt when she typed it, and comparing it to how she felt now, it took her breath away. She had kept going. Through the pain and the doubt and the fear. Through the days when getting out of bed felt impossible. Through the moments when she'd wanted to give up, to give in, to go back to David just to make the loneliness stop. She'd kept going, and look where it had led her. To art galleries and new love and self-discovery. To happiness that was authentically hers. To a life she'd built with her own 2 hands from the rubble of what came before. Margaret typed a new message to herself. "You did it. You really did it. I'm so proud of you." She sent it and smiled at her own sentimentality. But it felt important to acknowledge how far she'd come. To celebrate not just the destination but the journey that had gotten her here. Sleep came easily, her dreams filled with color and light. The next morning, Margaret woke to an email that made her sit straight up in bed. It was from a publisher, asking if she'd be interested in writing a book about her journey from divorce to artistic success. They'd seen the interviews she'd done, read the articles about her work, and thought her story could inspire others. A book. About her life, her transformation, her art. The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. She called Patricia first. "What do you think?" "I think it's a brilliant opportunity," Patricia said immediately. "Your story is powerful, Margaret. Think how many women are going through what you went through. Think how much hope you could give them." Next, she called Emma and Michael on a three-way call. They were both enthusiastic, already brainstorming titles and marketing strategies. Finally, she called Robert. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good writer? What if I don't have enough to say?" "Margaret," Robert said gently, "you're one of the most articulate people I know. And your story isn't just yours, it's universal. Every woman who's ever felt undervalued or taken for granted will see herself in your journey. That's powerful. So I should do it? Only if you want to. But yes, I think you should. I think you have something important to share." Margaret thought about it for the rest of the day. She read through the publisher's email again, noting their enthusiasm, their vision for the book. They wanted to include reproductions of her paintings alongside her written narrative. A visual and written journey of transformation. By evening, she'd made her decision. She replied to the email, saying yes. The next few months were a whirlwind of writing and painting and living. Margaret worked with an editor to craft her story, finding the balance between honesty and privacy, between vulnerability and strength. It was harder than she'd expected, revisiting the pain of those early days. But it was also cathartic, giving her a chance to process everything from a new perspective. She wrote about David's betrayal, but she also wrote about her own role in losing herself in the marriage. She wrote about the devastation of divorce, but also about the unexpected gifts it had brought. She wrote about learning to stand alone, and then about learning to stand alongside someone new. The book, titled Phoenix Rising, A Journey from Heartbreak to Healing, was scheduled for publication in the spring. Margaret was nervous about it, worried about being so exposed. But she was also excited. If her story could help even one woman find the courage to choose herself, it would be worth it. One afternoon, about a month before the book launch, Margaret was in her studio when her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Margaret?" It was David's voice, hesitant and unsure. She should have hung up immediately. She had every right to. But curiosity won out. "What do you want, David?" "I heard about your book. About everything you've accomplished. I wanted to congratulate you." "You already did that. At my exhibition. We don't need to keep having this conversation." "I know. I just..." There was a long pause. "I've been in therapy. Trying to work through my issues, figure out why I made the choices I did. And I realized I never properly apologized. Not really. David. Please, just let me say this. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was broken inside. I blamed my unhappiness on our marriage when the problem was always me. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved a partner who cherished you, who supported your dreams, who never made you feel like you weren't enough. I'm sorry I wasn't that person." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that. I mean it. That apology is more genuine than any you've given before. I don't expect it to change anything between us," David continued. "I know that ship has sailed. I just needed you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You were always enough. You were always more than enough. The problem was never you." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or longing. They were tears of closure. Of finally receiving acknowledgement for the pain she'd endured. "I appreciate you telling me that," she said. "And I'm glad you're in therapy. I hope you find what you're looking for." "What about you?" David asked. "Have you found what you're looking for?" Margaret looked around her studio, at the canvases in various stages of completion, at the life she'd built for herself. "Yeah," she said. "I have. I found myself. After they hung up, Margaret sat for a while, processing. David's apology didn't change the past. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. But it did offer something she hadn't realized she needed. Confirmation that the failure of their marriage hadn't been her fault. That she'd been worthy of love all along. She picked up her phone and texted Robert. "Can you come over tonight? I want to see you." His response was immediate. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect. I'll explain when you get here." That evening, when Robert arrived, Margaret met him at the door with a kiss that was deeper, more passionate than usual. When they finally broke apart, he was breathless. "Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for?" "For being you. For being patient. For showing me what healthy love looks like." She told him about David's call, about the apology, about the closure it had brought. And then she said something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "For more. For us. For building a life together. Not rushing, but moving forward. What do you think about looking at places together? Maybe finding something that's ours, not yours or mine but ours?" Robert's face lit up. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I'm not that scared 25-year-old who lost herself in her marriage anymore. I'm 52, and I know exactly who I am. And I know I want to share my life with you, as an equal partner." They spent the evening making plans, talking about what they wanted in a shared space, how they'd blend their lives while maintaining their independence. It was exciting and terrifying and exactly right. As spring arrived, Margaret's life reached a new peak. Her book launched to positive reviews and strong sales. Women reached out from all over the country, sharing their own stories, thanking her for her honesty and courage. She did book signings and interviews, each one reinforcing that her story mattered, that her voice had power. She and Robert found a beautiful loft apartment with enormous windows and space for both of their creative pursuits. Moving in together felt nothing like her marriage to David. There was no loss of self, no compromise that felt like sacrifice. Just two people creating something new together while maintaining their individual identities. Emma and Michael were thrilled to see their mother so happy. They welcomed Robert into the family with open arms, grateful to see Margaret with someone who truly valued her. On the anniversary of her divorce, Margaret threw a party. Not a celebration of her marriage ending, but a celebration of her new life beginning. She invited everyone who'd supported her through the journey: Laura, Patricia, her art class friends, Robert's colleagues, Emma and Michael and their partners. As she looked around her new home, filled with people she loved and who loved her, Margaret felt overwhelmed with gratitude. A year ago, she'd been devastated. 2 years ago, she'd been lost. But now? Now she was found. She clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something," she announced. "When my marriage ended, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd wasted 25 years on someone who didn't value me. But I was wrong. Those years weren't wasted, they taught me what I didn't want, which helped me figure out what I did want." She looked at Robert, who smiled encouragingly. "This past year has been the hardest and the best of my life. I've learned that I'm stronger than I knew, more talented than I believed, and worthy of love that honors rather than diminishes me. I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to chase your dreams, to become who you're meant to be." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Margaret continued. "So this party isn't about celebrating a divorce. It's about celebrating transformation. It's about celebrating all of you, who supported me and believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And it's about celebrating the future, which is brighter than I ever imagined it could be." They toasted and hugged and celebrated late into the night. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Laura pulled Margaret aside. "Do you remember what I told you that first morning? That you were going to be more than okay?" "I remember." "Was I right?" Margaret laughed. "You were so right. I'm not just okay, Laura. I'm happy. Really, truly happy." "Good. That's all I ever wanted for you." After the last guest left, Margaret and Robert cleaned up together, moving in comfortable synchronicity. When everything was done, they stood on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Any regrets?" Robert asked. "About what?" "Any of it. David, the divorce, the way things turned out." Margaret thought about it. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I don't regret it. Because it led me here. To this life, to you, to myself." "To yourself," Robert repeated. "That's the most important part, isn't it?" "It is." Margaret leaned against him. "I spent so long being defined by my relationships, someone's wife, someone's mother. But now I'm just me. And that's enough." "More than enough," Robert corrected, kissing the top of her head. As they stood there under the stars, Margaret thought about the choice she'd given David all those months ago. Walk away cleanly or watch her thrive without him. It had seemed like she was giving him power, but really, she'd been claiming her own. She'd been announcing that his participation in her life was no longer required for her happiness. And she'd been right. She'd thrived spectacularly without him. Not to spite him, but for herself. Because she deserved to. Because she could. The journey from devastation to joy hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks and hard days and moments when she'd wanted to give up. But she'd kept going, kept choosing herself, kept building the life she wanted brick by brick. And now, standing on her balcony in her new home with a man who loved and respected her, with a successful art career and a book that was helping others and children who were proud of her, now she could see that every painful step had been worth it. David had wanted someone younger. And in forcing Margaret to confront her own strength, her own worth, her own potential, he'd inadvertently given her the greatest gift. He'd given her the chance to become someone new. Someone better. Someone free. The woman who'd sat crying on her hallway floor barely recognized the woman Margaret had become. And that was exactly as it should be. Growth required change. Transformation required leaving the old self behind. As Margaret and Robert finally went inside to bed, she took one last look at the city lights. Somewhere out there, David was living his life. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was living hers. And somewhere out there, other women were sitting on their own hallway floors, crying over their own betrayals, wondering if they'd ever be whole again. To those women, Margaret wanted to say, "You will. I promise you, you will. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy. But if you keep choosing yourself, keep moving forward one step at a time, you'll discover strength you never knew you had. You'll discover that endings can be beginnings. That destruction can lead to creation. That the worst thing that ever happened to you can become the catalyst for the best thing you ever did for yourself. You'll discover that you are enough. You always were. You just needed to believe it." As Margaret drifted off to sleep in Robert's arms, in her new home, in her new life, her last thought was simple but profound. "Thank you, David. For leaving. For setting me free. For forcing me to find myself. I couldn't have done it without you walking away. And that's the most beautiful irony of all." If Margaret's story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? What helped you find your strength? Let's support each other in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want to see more stories of transformation, resilience, and people choosing themselves, make sure you subscribe. Because everyone deserves to know that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to rise from the ashes and fly. Remember, you are not defined by what breaks you. You are defined by how you rebuild.